Miss Liz. Tea time, yeah, making a difference, one cup at a time. Tea time, yeah. So be sure to grab your tea, grab a seat, and tune in to Miss Liz. Tea time, making a difference, one cup at a time. Tea time, yeah. Tea time, time.
Well, welcome to Tea Time. You know what time that is. It means it's storytelling time and words. That's what we do in this house. We don't serve a beverage. And tonight I have Raven Oak in the house, and we're going to talk about her memoir called Voices Carry. So before we get started with Raven in the house, we're going to get you over to Miss Liz's YouTube channel. Ring that little doorbell so that you can subscribe and be notified when all these Tea Times are live. Miss Liz is closing up in December after 5 long years, but you can still continue to watch these tea times, pass them around, get their books out there, get their services out there, because Miss Liz wants to encourage you all to keep checking out all of these tea times. So tonight I'm going to do a different type of tea. Tonight's tea is technology, education, and artistic. That's the tea we're serving. That's the tea that Raven has sent to me. So we'll be talking about that, and we'll be talking about her book as well called Voices Carry. So let's get started with the disclaimer, the bio, and then let's get Raven in here and let's spill some fun tea tonight with all of you guys. Disclaimer for Miss Liz's Tea Time live show. Miss Liz, myself, is going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment, please grant StreamYard permission to see your name at StreamYard.com. Please be advised that the content brought forward for any Tea Time show hosted by myself, Miss Liz, is always brought forward in good faith. However, may bring forward dialogues and opinions that are not representative of my platform. The facts and information are perceived to be accurate at the giving time of airing. All Tea Time guests and audience participants are responsible for using their good judgment and taking any action that may relate to the discussion. The content brought forward may include discussions for some where they may be emotionally at risk. It's significant to know that this show is engaging in discussion forums only to offer and inspire awareness and connection, and is not providing therapeutical advice. If you have any questions about this disclaimer or the panelist discussion, you may freely contact me, Miss Liz, through my email at bookingmissliz@gmail.com. Moving forward, should you choose to voluntarily participate in tonight's show in any aspect, I myself, Miss Liz, welcomes you. And should you decide that the show is not made for you at this time, I respect those wishes, and we'll see you at a later show at a later date and time. And again, all regular Tea Time shows are done on a Thursday, 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you see a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and even a Friday, which is coming next week, I believe, is a special surprise or rescheduled Tea Time, because that's how Miss Liz rolls. So now a little bit on my guest. Well, who is Raven Oaks? Well, Raven Oaks is a multiple international award-winning spectacular fiction author. Raven Oaks, they is best known for her award-winning epic fantasy and space opera novels. She also has many short stories published in anthologies and magazines. She's even published on the moon. Her memoir, Voices Carry, focuses on her life growing up, teaching and writing as a disabled, non-binary queer in Texas. Besides being a writer and an artist, she enjoys getting her game on, indulging in cartography. I'm going to get her to say that. Or starting at the ocean. She lives in Seattle area with her wife and their 3 kitties who enjoy lounging across the keyboard when writing deadline approach. Let me get Raven in here. Let me get her to say that word, because I can't stand when I can't do that. Welcome, Raven.
Thanks for having me. That word is cartography.
Cartography. See, you the tongue twisters, man. Some of you guys give me these words that I can't. I'm gonna be saying that all night long now. Cartography.
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 It's the study of maps.
Oh, well, look at that.
I love looking at old maps, but I also love making maps. It's been a hobby of mine since I was like 10 or so. So that is what that little word is.
Oh, well, look at that. I'm telling you, you guys keep me on my toes all the time. So Raven, let's get started. Who was Raven as a little girl and who's Raven now?
Oof. Well, I mean, I like to tell people, when people ask me, when did I become a writer and how did I become a writer? I tell them that it goes back to that little girl me, because child me, I told lies all over the place. And it wasn't necessarily that I intended to lie as much as my imagination got the better of me. And so, if I fell out of a tree and tore my shirt, I knew I'd get in trouble for doing that. We were poor, and shirts, you didn't tear clothing. So instead of I fell out of a tree, which sounds boring, it was, well, I was battling these bad creatures that had climbed up a tree and were trying to hurt a kitten, and I rescued a kitten, and as I was rescuing the kitten, my shirt tore. And so
Well,
I like to tell people, child me was a liar, and adult me is I get paid to lie.
I think, Raven, that's just a big imagination. I think we need to bring imagination back.
I agree. I agree.
So, who is Raven now as a grown woman?
I think I have the coolest job in the world, in that I am paid to use my imagination and to tell stories. And when I think about where we're at in the world right now in this moment, especially those of us in the United States and those of us to the north of us nearby, looking and going, oh dear, we need those stories. We need what they give us hope wise. We need those things to buoy us. And so, me as an adult, I want to change the world through the written word. I want to be somebody who, you read something I write and it makes you think and it makes you question. And then it maybe brightens your day in addition to that. And so that's who I am.
So, how old were you when you started writing, Raven?
I actually was first published when I was 5. I wrote a book as part of a literacy program, where the University of Florida was studying children and was looking at how to encourage them to tell stories, and whether encouraging people to tell stories would make for better readers. And so they actually published the book I wrote as part of their research. So it was kind of quasi published, but it was part of a research project, and ended up being published. So I like to say I started writing when I was 5. But professionally, I think I went to my first writers conference at 16, and that was probably when I started being much more serious about writing. Didn't get published until my 30s, but yeah, I've had a wild career in terms of length.
Well, I think it's the dots, right? You got to go up to the dots. You go
Yeah.
here, then you go there, then you go up, and then you go down. You know, and for my listeners out there, I make it really clear to the listeners that life is a journey, right? It doesn't happen overnight. So, like you were published at 5, then your first writing conference at 16, and then first published in your 30s. So it took time, and
Mhm.
it's not that overnight success, right? Where, oh my God, I published at 5, and I'm a writer for the rest of my life now.
Well, I like to tell people, writing is not a sprint, it is a marathon. And it does take time, and you can be published and still not have wild success. And sometimes it takes 10, 15, 20 books before, anything really comes of that. And so, you're right. It's not something that happens overnight. It's not a quick process.
So, Raven, how many books have you written?
Written or published?
Written, and then we'll get to the published.
I would say I've probably written 30 or 40 novels.
And published?
I have five published at the moment, with a whole bunch of short stories and various anthologies. So I have 23 publications to my name at the moment, and more slated for next year.
So, Raven, you just said anthologies. So, what type of anthologies have you written in?
Most of my short stories that I've sold have ended up in various themed anthologies that are speculative fiction, and so you'll end up with things like Soul Jar, for example, was through, I think, Forest Avenue Press. It was an anthology that focused on stories by disabled authors. And so all of the authors that were in this anthology are disabled in some form or another. Or I ended up in an anthology called 99 Tiny Terrors. And that one was, little itty bitty short stories that are meant to scare you a little bit, but be something that you can pick up, read for a couple minutes, and then put down. And you've read a story. And there are 99 of them in that anthology. So things like that.
So it's kind of like the Tales of the Crypts, right?
Yeah.
If any of my listeners out there want to check out any of the anthologies, can they find them online?
Absolutely. I know that you're probably going to post my link everywhere, but ravenoak.net, if you go to my website, there is a link on there that says full bibliography, and you can see all of my publications. And that way you can click on that and get to whatever anthology or novel you're interested in. And they're all available at bookstores everywhere. So it just kind of varies on what country you're in, which store you would go to find it. But
yeah, there's a lot of stores and a lot of social media stuff. And remember, before we went live, I said I'm going to ask you about something. So I'm going to just take you off track a little bit from the writing
sure.
books. But I found you on Ko-fi.
Ko-fi or coffee. I always call it Ko-fi, and it's sort of like you getting caught up on cartography. I've been told that it's coffee. It's meant to, because you're helping somebody pay for their coffee by donating on there. I started it and I haven't really played with it much. Apparently you can do things like put something on your website where if somebody likes what they're reading, they can like throw $1 at you, and it's like kind of like a tip jar.
Oh, so something like Patreon.
Yeah. And I went ahead and parked my name on there and was like, I'm going to get to that. And then I haven't gotten to it yet. So eventually, yes, I will.
I love that you say that, Raven. We park ourselves on social media because I got onto Blue Sky, and I think I put like 3 posts on there, and I'm just like, I got to get back on Blue Sky. Like, I got to get here. I got to get there. But I just park myself somewhere. And I love that you said that, park
Yep.
ourselves on social media, right? Like wherever we go. So I noticed on your website, when people go to your website, the ravenoak.net, they'll see like on the bottom all the social medias. And that's where I found that little cup.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, I haven't seen that one before, so I need to find out about that one.
Yeah, it's pretty much considered like a Patreon or a tip jar. And eventually I'll have more information on there. I just quite haven't yet.
See, and this is what I do. I just float a tease all over, right? I just keep spilling like over here and over there. And oh my God.
It's all
good. So Raven, you talked about disabilities. So do you feel comfortable talking about
Sure.
the disabilities you live with?
Yeah, sure. So, disability is a spectrum, like most things in the medical community. I am autistic and I have ADHD, which are considered disabilities, but I also have a birth defect in my spine that I've, obviously had since birth, being a birth defect, but it means that I am slowly losing my ability to feel my legs. And at some point, I will reach a point where I probably won't be able to walk. And they can't really go in and fix it without endangering the nerves further. And so it's just what it is. It is just kind of a part of me. And when I first started having problems walking and with my spine and with lack of feeling, they thought it was all kinds of things. And it wasn't really until, I guess, when I was maybe 37, 36, that they discovered that it was actually a birth defect in the spine. Just because our insurance and healthcare down here is not very good in the United States. So they did a lot of, we don't know, we don't really want to look, and until they finally looked. And so those are the bulk of my disabilities. I am immunocompromised. I do have autoimmune disorders, and those also can debilitate me on a day, just depending upon, how things are going on any given day. And so, yeah, there's a lot going on medically with me, but I'm hanging in there, and as long as I can still tell my stories, then this too will just keep on going.
Well, and just because you have a disability doesn't mean you can't write, right? Doesn't mean that
Exactly.
you can't have dreams and goals
Hmm.
during that. So this is a genetic disorder?
Yeah, it appears to be. Gosh, I forgot the term on it, but it's related to. I want to say it's related to ankylosing spondylitis. Is
Okay.
the thing? That's an autoimmune disease where your bones actually fuse together. Instead of my bones in my spine fusing together, my nerves are fusing together. So, you have a big nerve that runs through your spine that goes right to your brain. And then when it gets down near your rear, it splits off on the sides and goes down your legs. Well, where mine splits, it's fusing to other nerves in that area. And when they fuse like that, the brain doesn't know how to communicate with them anymore. And so it stops communicating, which then means that you're not feeling things. Like my cat can scratch me on my leg and I won't feel it. I can
Oh,
be bleeding and totally not feel it. And it's related to the fact that those nerves are basically making a big cluster, and my brain goes, I don't know what to do with that.
yeah. It's hard when you live with an illness, or a disability that people don't understand, right? Or
Mhm.
doctors are so fast to just shoot it off, like it's, you
Yeah.
know, this is what it is. Just live with it and deal with it. And I completely get that because doctors, the heart and passion is gone. I find,
Yeah.
but they've been through so much as well, that I try not to judge, and I try not to, like, be hard on them. But sometimes I'm just like, would you just listen?
Exactly.
So let's get into your tea, Raven. And the tea you gave me was technology, education, and artistic. So tell me why you gave me those three words for your tea.
Well, I mean, I grew up in the kind of the cusp of late Gen X, early millennial generation. And so I grew up with the explosion of technology. I was on the internet before there was really an internet. It was more just BBSs and old school kind of places, and I got to watch the internet basically be born, the modern internet as we know it. And it's always been a part of my life. And then when I became a teacher, I besides teaching English, I also taught computer classes. And so technology has just kind of always been kind of a foundation of who I am. And then, I spent 13 years as a teacher, and so that's been a big part of who I am. Even though I'm no longer teaching in public school, as a writer, it's kind of my job also to help other writers and help them hone their craft. So that education part of it has persisted. It's always, been there, and I think will probably be there till the day I die. Um, Artistic is it's what I live and breathe. I mean, I paint and I make money off my art. I make money off of my writing. But I also make money off of music. I'm a musician. And so like I am, I kind of like to say it's the holy trinity of arts. I'm kind of in all of those things. And I can't think of a time in my life when art in some form or fashion wasn't a part of it.
I didn't find the music. I found the art
Ah,
when I
it is on
checked.
my website. It's a little hidden because I don't put a lot of music out there these days. That's the downside of being talented in many areas, is that you feel yourself. You know this too. You feel pulled across too many things, and it's like, well, what gives? But for people who are curious, if they go to my website, up at the top where it says other work, if you scroll down, it says musical projects. And then you can see I have a CD out from way back when I was a music major in college. Um, and you can listen to it streaming on a whole bunch of places. And eventually, someday, I'll put more music up because I still do create music. It's just not been my focus.
Yeah, I just found it. The musical projects. See,
Mhm.
I'm checking while you're talking. I'm just like,
Mhm.
oh, I didn't see that. Where I missed that. So talk about a little bit about your artwork, Raven.
Yeah, well, growing up, I was always drawing things to go with my stories that I was writing. I was under the impression that I was not very good at art just because the people around me didn't think I was that good at it. And my art teachers, because I wasn't perfect, I guess, they also were just kind of like, hey, stick to your writing. It wasn't until more recently that I was showing some of my artwork to friends who were like, actually, your stuff is really good. Have you, considered selling any of it? And I made some, copies of stuff and took it with me to a convention, and it sold well. And so now I've done a couple of book covers for other authors as cover art, and I continue to do art. It's, it sometimes it's images that are in my brain from my stories, characters, or places. But sometimes I also dive into fandom. I'm a huge geek. And so, somebody will say something, some quote from Doctor Who, and my brain will go, ooh, what if we took Doctor Who and Pokemon and mixed them together and suddenly all the Pokemon were doctors? And then my brain goes, yes, let's paint that. And then I paint that. So, which I actually haven't painted that. And I just came up with that idea, and I need to remember that actually.
Where's your notepad? Right, grab
Yeah,
your pen, grab
no,
your notes. Like this is why we need notepads, guys.
yeah, well,
Writers
and I
do
have
this.
my
We have
notes
journals
here
and pads
too.
all over.
Well, and I have my notepad, so I'm like, okay, Doctor, Pokemon, art. Okay. Yeah, so I've written that down now. So you can see that coming from me probably soon. But that's the kind of what happens is things will just pop in my head, and I feel compelled to, put pen to, or paintbrush to paper and you know, make that visual come to life.
But sometimes those teachers, back in the day, or friends and family that used to say, that's not good enough. To stick to this, and instead of that, maybe it was something that they made them uncomfortable, or they were like, oh, how does she see this? How does he see this? Like,
Mhm.
so they tried to kill that dream, right? Kill that spark.
Well, I
Uh,
know that
the beginning
growing
for you.
growing up, I think having the fact that I grew up in a very religious and abusive household, there was also some element of them wanting me to grow up and do something that would make lots of money. So, something to be proud of. In other words, go be a doctor, go be, fill in the blank. The idea of going into the arts meant two things. Number one, I would not be making gobs of money, probably. And number two, I would be doing things that were being artistic would probably be more liberal, and that was not seen as a good thing. Um, the idea of, being a feminist or being someone who believes in equality, those were not things to be proud of. And so I think there was a lot done to discourage anything that could lead to that.
Well, I think it goes right back to the beginning, right, Raven? When we started the conversation as a little girl, you said, "Oh, I lied a lot." I don't think it was lying. I think it was more of an imagination that wanted
Yeah.
to be released. So you would come up with these fibs. They call them fibs. But you know what? It was like having that the movie Drop Dead Fred, right? The imaginary friend where nobody could see him, but
Hmm.
she had a lifetime of adventures and thrills, and I think that's where artistic people with autism or ADHD or dyslexia or any kind of those
Hmm.
learning disabilities, I know for myself, I like to go into the rabbit holes, and I like to see
Yeah.
where the rabbit holes take me, right?
Yeah.
um, and like you said, with Pokemon and Doctor Who, like I think that's pretty cool. Like as you were describing it, I was trying to envision it, and I was like, I think that'd be pretty cool. Like I can't wait to see where this is gonna go, right?
Well, it's like, could you imagine Pikachu, wearing the Fourth Doctor's scarf and going and jumping in the TARDIS? I mean, to me, that just sounds like, of course. Why would we not do this?
I can't wait to see it. Like I'm gonna reach out to you and I'm gonna say, Raven, did you draw that picture yet? So So, Raven, let's get into your book. The reason that you reached out to me, and your book is called Voices Carry. I like the
Sure.
name Voices Carry because I'm a big advocate of voices. It doesn't matter what topic it is. I believe that we all have a voice to make a difference. So let's talk about your book, on how you
Sure.
got the title and how it came about and what it's about.
Well, it's interesting because Voices Carry is actually the title of a song by a group called Till Tuesday from the 80s. Amy Mann, who later had a solo career, that was her group back in the 80s. And when I was a kid and that song came out, I remember being crowded around somebody's television because MTV was showing the new hits of the week. Um, and that song really struck me because in the video and in the lyrics, it's actually about a couple, and the boyfriend or husband, whichever that figure, was telling the girlfriend to be quiet because voices carry. Because it was a, hey, don't embarrass me. I don't want to air dirty laundry. Yeah, I'm yelling at you, but you should shh, don't tell anyone. It That really caught me off guard because it was one of those, probably the first example of me stepping back and going, wait, something's wrong with my home life. Because that looks more like my home life than everybody else's families. Huh. I wonder what's with that. And so for me, I'm a fan of everybody using their voice. And I'm very much a fan of people speaking out and telling their truths and not hiding the things that happen to them, because silence is how people get away with doing what they're doing. And
Exactly.
so, between this song and that idea of voices being able to carry, that they should carry our truths out there, um, it seemed to be the perfect title. And when we hit the pandemic, there was a lot of time when long COVID made it difficult for me to write because the brain fog and some of the symptoms I had, I was in bed and I couldn't really do much. But as I started coming out of that, the things I found myself drawn to writing were nonfiction because it was easier. For me, it was easier to talk about things that had happened to me than it was to try to make up these massive epic fantasy worlds. Um, and I had long been told by others, oh, you really should write a story or write a book about the things that happened to you as a teacher. People kept being drawn to those stories. And so it kind of became that perfect storm of, now is the time I should really do this. And so that's kind of how Voices Carry was born.
So, Voices Carry, is it your real life story?
It is. It is. I have changed all of the names and the places, not just to protect others, but to protect myself as well. But the things in it are the things that happened to me, um, as a child, but also as a teacher. And, the environments and situations that I found myself in, not just as somebody who's autistic and disabled, but also somebody who's non-binary and queer. And when I was trying to figure out, you know, is there something wrong with me or is that normal? Even with my upbringing, I wasn't exposed to a lot of the queer community. And so as I was trying to find myself at the same time as teaching, kids who were also trying to find themselves, um, there was a lot of conflict being in Texas in an area where being queer was a secret. You did not talk about that openly. And if you did, school districts would do their best to basically fire you and chase you away. If you were lucky. If you were not lucky, somebody beat you up in a back alley. So there were some very scary situations I found myself in. And so, yeah, this was me basically saying, hey, I'm tired of being silent. I'm tired of being quiet about this. When my country is electing certain persons that they're electing, it's time to speak up. There's a problem.
Yeah. So how long did it take for you, Raven, to find that voice for yourself within?
You know, my my finding my voice has been an evolutionary thing probably since college. I mean, when I escaped home and decided, I'm not going to let somebody silence me anymore. That was like step 1. But I still, even though I was like, I'm going to speak out against, prejudice and all these horrible things I see in my 20s, I still found myself being silenced. I still allowed people to put me in a corner in ways I just didn't anticipate. But also, when you're autistic, sometimes in instead of just fight or flight, there's also freeze. You
Yes.
freeze. And I would find myself freezing and going, but I'm stronger than this. But I don't want to be quiet about this. Why am I letting somebody silence me? And so, I've kind of had these waves of, okay, I'm going to speak out about this. And then, oh, let's speak out again. And, oh, nope. Okay, quiet. And I think, I don't know, I'm 46, and this was kind of my, how much longer am I going to, you know, be quiet about some of these incidences? And I just kind of had it. People talk about not really having any issues with being honest anymore, and just being open about everything. And I've kind of hit that age where that's happened. I'm
Well,
trying to
as you
keep.
get older, I once I hit 50, I'm just like, I don't care who likes me. I don't care if you
Exactly.
agree with me, but I'm not going to be quiet anymore. It's
Yeah.
time for my voice to come out. And I think being a survivor of abuse for myself, Raven, as I got older, I found my voice. I didn't want to be that
Hmm.
freeze again. Why am I freezing? Why am I getting all this triggers again?
Yeah.
And that's when we have to start removing ourselves from situations and environments and stuff like that as
Hmm.
well, right? And as you get older, it just hits you more, and it's like, no, we're not doing
Yeah.
this anymore.
Exactly. Exactly. I was trying to find a PG way of putting it, and you have done that beautifully.
Well,
Um,
I have the little switch where I can put it explicit, right? Because even if we say the word shit, we have to put it in.
yeah.
We can't express ourselves anymore. It's always that fright, flight, or freeze.
Hmm.
And we don't talk about the freeze much. So I'm really glad that you brought the freeze up, because for my listeners out there, a lot of my listeners are survivors. Uh, you know, we do freeze. We get
Yeah.
re-traumatized. The triggers hit us, and we're just like, where's this coming from, right? Out of
Yeah.
nowhere. I was fine for 10 years, and all of a sudden this thing is making me freeze again.
Hmm.
Why is it happening?
Yeah.
um, so Raven, with your book, Voices Carry, who what's the target audience for that book?
The target audience is actually kind of a twofold audience. There's the, I want people in the queer community to read it and know they're not alone. I want autistic people to read it and know they're not alone. Same thing with disabled people. Like the people that I identify, these are my people. I want them to be buoyed by the understanding that yes, your voice is your strongest weapon, use it. But I also want educators and people involved in educating to read it, because I feel like some of my colleagues, they just didn't have training on how to deal with someone like me. They didn't understand autism in an adult. They're trained on how do you treat your autistic students, but they're never trained on what to do when your autistic colleague is having a meltdown and sensory overload. How do you deal with that? And so the way they treated me was horrible. And I think that if they knew that it hurt me that badly, they would be, oh my God, I didn't mean to, but they didn't know. And
Yeah.
so I want educators to read that, not just for autism, but for queerness and everything else that I've mentioned, so that they have a better understanding of, okay, the things that you learned in training about how to teach kids with these issues, it also applies to adults. it also applies to your colleagues. Here are things you can do to not be a jerk to your colleagues, to be a better educator. And so I'm kind of wanting both sides of that audience wise.
I think it's good, right? We need both sides. We need the light and the dark, right? We need both
Mhm.
in order to make a difference, in order to make changes.
Yeah.
Raven, were you diagnosed as an adult with autistic
Yeah.
or a child?
Adult. Same with ADHD. Like it was, we hear things about how in the 80s and somewhat the 90s that women or people assigned female at birth were not diagnosed with ADHD and autism as much. It seemed to be a boys disorder. And so there are a lot of us out there, and probably some of your listeners as well, that yeah, we didn't get these diagnoses until we were much older because it just wasn't looked at.
Yeah. I had a guest on at the beginning of last month, Yana Davis. She's been on Tea Time a couple of times, and she's a Black adult diagnosis of autism and um, autistic. And she said the same thing. We're not all Rain Man. We're not all men. We're not all boys. White boys. There are
Mhm.
black. There are white women. There. Uh, and that's the thing. We're being put in these categories, right? And it was like growing up, right? If you were strange and different and you like to hum and sing and dance, instead of reading a book and doing math questions, you were put into a different category, right? You were the rebel, you were the
Mm.
troubled kid, you were, you know, attention seeking. Uh, but it was the education wasn't there. There are
Yeah.
different levels of individuals. We weren't teaching by individuals; we were teaching by groups.
Yeah.
And what didn't fit in the group was put out of the group.
Exactly.
So,
And
and that's one thing that I noticed about the work that you do, right? Is that I could feel that is that you were put to the side a lot. So you came with your stories and said, look, at disabled people can still write,
oh
disabled
yeah.
people can still have dreams, still play music, do arts. Um, I think it's really incredible what you're doing, Raven, because you're using your voice and it is making a difference. You know, and
I
just reach out and
appreciate
say,
that.
hey, do you want to have a conversation with me? That's the biggest thing is we need to start reaching out and saying, can we have conversations? Can we
Mhm.
have an honest, heart to heart, open discussion about
we we have more in common than we realize, and we are all stuck on this pale little blue dot in this expanse of the universe. And it's not like we can hop on a ship for reals and go settle somewhere else. This is it. So we got to take care of each other, and we got to take care of our home. And if we don't, that's bad for all of us.
right? We all got to work together. We got to learn to work together, love each other. Like,
Yeah.
I keep telling my kids I'm gonna build me a planet where everybody just learns to get along.
Hmm.
S- Raven, I want to get into your other words that you gave me. You gave me education and autistic. We talked a little bit about the education as a teacher in that. Uh, how do you feel the education system is today for the children?
it's it's rough. I mean, I saw some of it before I left in school shootings being more commonplace. I have my own triggering incidences with some of that, which I wrote about in Voices Carry. But I look now at how many incidences there are in a year with weapons on campus and school shootings and violence, and these poor kids. And then you get into things like, they can't use their name and their chosen gender, because people are being stupid about, everything. They can't be themselves, and they can't do so without fear of, some kind of harm. And I don't know how they do it. I don't know how the kids are okay. I mean, they open their mouths and they say things with their voice, and they educate people in their own ways. And it amazes me they're that strong, because holy smokes, I don't know that I could go through school as a kid now and be that strong. Like I'm amazed by them.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a different time of learning, a different time for the children. And this is why I like having these open conversations with guests like you, with all different walks of life, because it gives a different flavor and blend for everything in life, right? That acceptance, right? Just take the time and get to know people, because you might be missing out on an incredible person because the ignorance is there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to get into the word that you gave me, because I asked you to give me one word to describe yourself, and you gave me eccentric. I love that word. So why that word?
I am that weirdo, that oddball, the person who has hobbies and joys and loves that are just, all over the place. Someone might look at me and go, "Oh yeah, okay, you've got a funky haircut and, stuff, and it's blue hair, so you're obviously an artist of some sort." And I'm like, "Yeah, but, as it came up when we were talking earlier, I also love making. I love cartography. But I also am a huge video gamer, and I'm also somebody who I crochet. I love crocheting. Like there's just this like bouncing all over the place level with me and in my interests. And so yeah, it just seems to fit that eccentric is the right word for me.
You know what I get from you, Raven? I get from parking on social media platforms to bouncing with different arts and creativity. My oldest loves crocheting, and she says it calms her down, and she
Yeah.
has ADHD, so
Yeah.
uh, she doesn't want to accept it, but that's what she has, and the crocheting actually calms her down.
hmm It's something that I can do where I can put on something on TV, like a movie or a TV show I've seen before. So I don't necessarily have to watch it actively, but I can kind of listen and my brain remembers what it looks like on the screen. And then I can do a lot of back and forth. So I can crochet and half watch, half listen while crocheting and just zen. It's a level of zen.
So let's get into that word that I couldn't pronounce at the beginning of the show. Let's talk about that a little bit, because I love maps.
Cartography.
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 Oh, I
hmm
got it. So let's talk about that. What is it about the maps that really get your attention?
Maps tell stories. I mean, if you pull out a map of what the earth looked like to settlers who were, exploring some continent, way hundreds of years ago, the changes in the coastline or changes of where cities or settlements were, all of those things are part of our history. And that means that they're part of our myth, our stories. And so I can look at those kinds of maps and it's like, oh, this is really cool. I wonder what they would think of, this now, thinking about those kinds of connections is how I come up with stories. I think a lot of science fiction and fantasy authors, that's kind of what we're doing is looking at, oh, what would it be like if, if the Civil War took place in space? Oh, wow, that's totally different. Or, all of those different kinds of questions, but they all come from, our histories. We look at back to look forward. And so that's kind of my fascination with maps is that same idea of looking back to think forward.
I think that's the history, right? And when I first got on my first plane ride, Raven, and I looked out the window and I seen all these little squares and circles and
Oh, I'm
lines.
so sorry. Go ahead.
I said to my children, I said, that's how the maps were made. Mom got to see the maps in the sky because all of the different areas and all that were all broken up. I always wondered how they made maps, and I was like, they had to have taken a plane ride to take these pictures to create the maps.
Yeah.
uh, there's so much story behind things in history, right?
hmm
uh, so if you could go to any planet, Raven, where would you go?
You know, Jupiter.
Oh,
There is something so awe-inspiring about the red eye or the red dot on Jupiter and the pattern that all of the various gases make on that just there's a story there, and there's been stories written on it, and there will always be stories written on it. But that one fascinates me.
I've never gotten Jupiter, and you know what? I never even thought of Jupiter until you started talking about it in the red eye. Now you got me curious. I'm going to be doing some research after this, and that's what I mean. I love having these conversations because then it opens my mind into different opportunities and different things of learning as well. I always think of Venus or Mars. I always want to go to
Mhm.
Mars. I don't know why I want to go to Mars, but I want to go to Mars. I think
Mars
it's
is
the Mars chocolate bar that I think of. Like,
Well, Mars is fascinating too. I mean, we know that there was water on our moon, and we suspect that there was water on Mars. We've looked at things that look like potentially what used to be frozen oceans. I mean, we've seen some of that, and so yeah, there's definitely stories on Mars too, and I could see why a lot of people would pick Mars
yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just a candy bar. Like,
or that.
it's one of my favorite candy bars. Not supposed to have it, but you know what? And good Mars bar is a good once in a while. I want to talk about three T's with you, Raven: teaching, transition, and truth.
Mhm.
So let's talk about those three T's because that's part of the Voices Carry books.
Yeah. So when I was thinking about the title for this, I wanted to pick some words that would give people a better understanding of what they were in for with the book. Because voices carry could mean a lot of different things. And this really is a story about my role as a teacher and educator, how I came to that role, why I left that role, um, but also transitions in the sense that, the me who started off as a teacher, I didn't know that non-binary was a thing. That was not a vocabulary word I was familiar with. And so as I was going through my teaching career and my writing career and figuring out who I was, my transition into my true self as a non-binary person was a part of that and influenced, all aspects of my life, which eventually then led to my truth, my telling my story in a way that could potentially help educate others and help others in their own transitions and figuring out who they are as they then turn around and potentially, speak their truths. And those three terms just really sang to me because of that. And so that's kind of where that came from.
So, Raven, talk about your transition a little bit. Was it a hard transition for you?
Um, I don't know that it was necessarily hard. I think that in terms of talking to my wife and being like, "Hey, I think I'm non-binary. I don't really think that I'm a woman. I'm non-binary. This is a thing." That was easy because I knew that my wife is an amazing person and she loves me, and that was never going to be a question or change. I know that doesn't happen for everybody. Sometimes, people figure out themselves and then their spouse is like, "Well, you're not the person I married," and then, things end poorly. I wasn't worried about that. I think what made my transition hard was the coming out and saying that to my family, to the people who are incredibly religious, who are very prejudiced and hateful towards the entire queer community, knowing that it was going to cost me my family, that it was more than likely going to be a scenario where I had to go no contact with everybody for my own protection. That was hard. That was probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. It was necessary and I don't regret it, but yeah, when people talk about the horror stories of coming out and their parents disowning them and things of that nature, yeah, that kind of shit happens. Sorry.
No, and we got the button for the shit word.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a question, Raven.
Yeah.
Why do you think there's so much hate for the non-binary?
I think when you go back, queer people and non-binary people and even transgender people, they've existed for eons. I mean, Native American people have two-spirit. I mean, these are people who have always existed. We've always been here. Um, you go and you look at the evolution of gay rights, for example. You know, gay marriage used to be completely hated and never going to happen, and like gay people were these evil things, blah blah blah. And over time, we fought for our rights and things slowly changed. There's still a lot of hatred out there, but less than there was. I think we're seeing a similar progression now with transgender people and non-binary people, in that we're now the hated group, so to speak. We're now the misunderstood group, and hopefully eventually we will push past that and we will not be the hated group anymore, that we will gain rights in a similar fashion. But it's a battle, and I think a lot of it stems from really ignorance, just a lack of understanding. A lot of the people who hate us think we're a new thing, and they you know I it makes me just totally baffled when I hear people talk about how there are kids in schools that identify as a cat and they're using litter boxes in classrooms. That was literally on the news, I kid you not. That's
Wow.
not happening. I mean, teachers can't even afford books in their classroom. What makes you think they can afford kitty litter? I mean, or trans surgery or anything else. I mean, it's not happening. It really isn't. But people are so afraid of what they don't know and what they don't understand. They will make up anything that pushes that narrative that makes them feel more comfortable. And
Well,
so, that's what we're seeing, and it's frustrating.
I think, Raven, it goes well. It's like mental illness, right? Mental
Yeah.
illness for the longest time. Oh, well, get away from them, right? They have this
Yeah.
curse, Instead of getting to know and understand mental illness, with autism and autistic, it's the same thing. Oh, they're different. Get away from them. It
Yeah.
was always taking and removing us from a group to another group,
Hmm.
and then judging the group without understanding the group. And this is why on Tea Time, I like to bring these topics to the table, and I like to bring all walks of life from all over the world, because we need to start opening our hearts to understand people. We need to make a difference. We need to bring that impact of understanding that we all bleed red. It doesn't matter if we're queer, if we're straight, if we're homosexual, if we're gay, we're all bleeding red. We're all
Yeah.
individuals. We're all human beings. Where did humanity disappear?
Yeah.
You know, and I really think that it's important to have these conversations. It's important to sit and have this heart to heart, because it means that we're taking the time to understand one another instead of judging.
Yeah.
Because I could have said when you reached out to me, Raven, oh no, 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 I and but I wanted to know. I wanted to know your story. I
Yeah.
wanted to know you as an individual,
Well,
you know?
it's so fascinating too. Like, um, when you think back to 1920s, 1930s, little boys wore dresses, pink little dresses, no less, for official photos. Like, that was a thing.
Yeah.
The What clothing someone is supposed to wear, and pink being girls and blue being boys, didn't really happen till like the 1950s, 1960s. The whole like McCarthyism and Red Scare and all moving into that stuff. And um, there's no reason for it. I mean, what our culture defines as gender and gender norms changes and has changed since the beginning of humanity. So, like, I like to tell people, yeah, there's sure there's biological sex and all that kind of stuff, but what gender norms are changes as we evolve and as our culture evolves. And it's just as much a spectrum as autism and anything else that you look at in life. And so to assume that everybody fits into one box or another, and that the binary is the only thing that exists, is a very kind of self-centered way of looking at the world. That's just not really how it is. And it doesn't mean that because I'm non-binary, you have to suddenly feel threatened and be non-binary. I'm not trying to like convert you. I don't want you to be your unauthentic self. I want you to be you. And I think that that's part of it is they're afraid that we're trying to change everybody to be like us. And no, we just want to live.
Well,
We
you
just
want to be
want to exist.
accepted. You just
Yeah.
want to be accepted like the rest of us.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is because instead of taking the time to understand, it's easier to judge, right? It's easier to remove. It's easier
Mhm.
to target. It's easy, these are things that we're all doing as individuals. When someone says, I don't judge, yes, we all judge. All of us, we all
Absolutely.
judge,
Yeah.
right? Let's be honest with each other.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
what we don't understand, we judge. What we don't take the time to understand, we judge, you know? And we need to start having this heart to heart conversations, and we need to start bringing these topics to the table and say, look, I'm not here to change you. I'm here to just say, I'm different. I don't fit in your box. Uh,
Yeah.
you know, uh, I'm told that all the time, Miss Liz, you don't fit in the box, and I don't want to fit in your box.
Yeah.
Miss Liz has her own little tea box that I fit in, and I'm good with that box. Uh, you know, um, but I want to wrap it up with I asked you your favorite color, uh, Raven, and you gave me blue. And as everybody can see, Raven's hair is blue. She's wearing blue. Miss Liz is wearing blue. So what is it about the blue?
You know, is as much as being born in December apparently makes me a fire baby. I grew up in Florida, and then I was born in California, grew up in Florida, grew up in Texas. I've always lived near water. I'm a water person. I can't help but be water. And there is something about staring out into the blue ocean that is just so calming, and just it makes me aware that that water stretches across an entire planet, that we're all interconnected, that we're all here together. um, so from that aspect to Carl Sagan's pale blue dot and his little speech about this is home, I've just always been drawn to the concept of blue, and the what the sky and the water and all these things mean in terms of this is us, this is humanity.
I love that you said that humanity because we need to bring that word to the table more often. Humanity. We all need to be our true authentic selves, and we all need to be that color, right? And that's why I asked that color, because a color means different for everybody. And I love that you brought the flow and the connection and everything, because you go right back to the cartographic, I know, cartographic
Cartography.
cartography. I say I'm going to practice this word all night, guys. Cartography.
Think of
And
it like car
car
tog
cartography.
graphy. There you go.
There we go. Miss Liz got it out. But it goes right back to the maps, right? It goes back to the storytelling. It goes back to
Mhm.
the connection and unity and working together. All of the different provinces join together in a map. All of the states join together in the map. It's
Mhm.
connection, inclusion, diversity. That's what real diversity and inclusion is accepting
Yeah,
everybody for who they are. You know,
absolutely.
I really enjoyed this conversation. I really enjoyed having you as a guest. And if anybody would like to reach out to you, Raven, how can they reach out to you? And then I'm going to do some shout outs, because I see that there are a couple people that are viewing from Cornwall, and I would like to give a special shout out to them as well. So,
Sure. Well, ravenoak.net is my main website, and all my social media links are on there. You can also email me at raven-oak.com, and you can contact me any of those ways. Again, you can hit me up on social media. And just because I haven't shown it, Voices Carry, it's available everywhere. Go grab a copy.
awesome. Well, thank you so much, Raven. I had a blast having you on as a
You too.
guest.
Thank
And
you.
it's a small world. We have some friends that are connected, and they were also tea time guests, so it was an honor to have you here. I want to give a special shout out to the Connect Beaver, who is tuning in. They are a big home business that just started in February, and they are doing awesome. So if anybody needs Christmas gifts or anything, I would go check them out. Miss Liz is going to be doing some Christmas shopping. And again, I want to thank everybody for tuning into Tea Time. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, Miss Liz is closing Tea Time after 5 long years and over 400 interviews. So be sure to check out all those interviews. I will be back tomorrow with Jason with FNCU for you. Free speech. We're going to bring that to the table. And then we have Dr. Z coming in. We're going to be talking about menopause matters, because we all know how menopause hits us women and even men. As some of you don't think it hits men, it does as well. So we'll be bringing those topics to the table. And then we're going to have Kyle Kuhn joining us on the 28th in the afternoon. And he'll be talking about Paralympics. So he went to Paris at the Olympics, and he'll be talking about his story as well. Special Olympics. And then we have Sad Times, who was supposed to be on this afternoon, but will be on the 28th at 7 p.m. talking about his podcast. So if anybody's looking for opportunity to share their mental illness or stories, personal stories as well, reach out to Kevin Kristen from the Sad Time podcast, and all that good stuff. And we just keep spilling tea until we wrap it up with the reunion show on December 19th. If you guys want to know more about that, check out the press releases on multiple news outlets, and also Miss Liz's website at www.misslizsteatime.com. And I'll see everybody tomorrow, same time, same place, and we'll spill tea all over again. So until then, keep being your true selves and keep spilling your tea.